Excuse me, is this where the technician evaluation takes place?
This location? Let me confirm. Please pause the departure for a moment.
A. Contract staff used the service road, the shuttle attendant said, pointing past the glass doors without looking at the paper in Tiana Brooks's hand. You'll need to walk around the garage. I'm not contract staff. Tiana kept her voice level, though her left shoulder already ached from carrying a backpack, a garment bag, and the plastic folder holding the documents she had spent 6 weeks assembling. Her 8-year-old son's dinosaur keychain knocked against the folder each time she shifted her grip. I have an appointment at the Halcyon Aviation Training Annex, Building 4. The attendant finally looked at her, taking in her dark brown skin, twists pinned behind her ears, navy slacks, and the work boots she had polished before sunrise. His eyes stopped on the boots. Like I said, service road. Behind her, a boarding announcement rolled through the private terminal in a calm female voice, followed by the low whine of turbines beyond the windows. Tiana glanced at the clock above the information desk, 8:17. Her interview was at 9, and the email had warned that late arrivals would lose their slot. She turned away before frustration could turn into the kind of expression people later described as attitude. The terminal map showed runways, lounges, parking decks, and rental cars, but no Building 4. A man in a charcoal coat stood near the window, speaking quietly with another traveler. He looked to be in his late 50s, silver at his temples, carry-on beside one polished shoe. Nothing about him suggested he worked there, but he had the relaxed posture of someone who understood airports. "Excuse me," Tiana said. "Do you know where the Halcyon Training Annex is?" The man ended his conversation with a small nod and looked at the paper she offered. His expression changed at the address. "Building 4?" he asked. "It's what they sent me." He read the second line where the interview department was printed beneath the address. Halcyon Return to Tech Program, Airframe Systems Track. "You're interviewing there, if I can find it." Tiana gave him a tired half-smile. Apparently, my sense of direction became suspicious somewhere around security. The joke surprised him enough that one corner of his mouth lifted. "You're not supposed to use the service road. There's an employee shuttle on the east curb." "That's what I thought." The man looked toward the attendant, who was now helping a white couple with 2 oversized ski cases. He had walked around the desk to point something out on their map. Tiana noticed the difference too, but she was past wanting a stranger to confirm it. She slid the paper back into her folder. "East curb. Thank you. Wait." His eyes settled on the blue header of the appointment letter. Time, 9. That annex is 12 minutes away if the shuttle leaves on schedule, and 25 if somebody decides I belong on the loading dock. He studied her for a moment, not offended, not embarrassed either. "What do you do?" "Aircraft maintenance." Or I did. She adjusted the garment bag. "Regional carrier out of Louisville. 7 years. Sheet metal, flight controls, mostly narrow-body work." Why a return program? That question carried more weight than directions required. Tiana nearly walked away. She had learned to ration the personal parts of her life, especially with strangers who asked professional questions as if her resume had a missing page. "My son got sick 2 years ago," she said. "I stepped out when his treatment schedule stopped fitting a night shift. He's fine now." Companies like the experience until they see the gap. The man's gaze dropped briefly to the dinosaur keychain. "Halcyon invited you, recruiting did. Then somebody called yesterday to ask whether I understood the program was hands-on industrial work." She let the phrase sit where it belonged. "I told them I'd replaced elevator control cables in January with hydraulic fluid freezing on my gloves." He said they were just making sure. A boarding agent approached from behind him. "Mr. Vale, they're ready whenever you are. Wheels up at 8:40. Tiana's attention shifted despite herself. Vale. The name tugged at something she had seen on the Halcyon website, but she could not place it quickly enough. The man did not move toward the gate. Instead, he looked again at her appointment letter, then at the attendant across the terminal. "Did recruiting tell you Building 4 was reassigned last month?" he asked. Tiana frowned. "No. The return program moved to Building 9. Her stomach dropped. My letter says 4. I know." He reached for his phone, then stopped before unlocking it. Whatever he had been about to do, he reconsidered. The boarding agent tried again. "Sir, Zurich airspace gets tight after 10. If we miss the slot..." "I understand." Vale picked up his carry-on, but instead of turning toward the aircraft, he handed it to the agent. "Take my bag off the plane." The woman blinked. You're canceling? For today. Tiana stared at him. Because somebody sent me to the wrong building? No. His voice remained quiet. Because Building 4 has been closed to applicants for 5 weeks, and your letter was issued 6 days ago. Across the terminal, the shuttle attendant looked over at them. Bill slipped his phone into his coat and faced Tiana. East Curb is still the fastest way there. But if you don't mind, I'd like to ride with you. She tightened her grip on the folder. Why? This time, when he answered, there was no trace of a smile. Because I approved that return program. Tiana followed him through the sliding doors because standing still would not get her to Building 9. The east curb smelled faintly of jet fuel and wet concrete, and a white employee shuttle idled beneath a sign marked Halcyon Operations. Vale stepped toward it, but the driver lifted a palm before either of them reached the door. Applicants use visitor transport from Lot C, he said. Then he recognized Vale and straightened. Mr. Vale. Sorry, sir. I didn't realize. Vale glanced at Tiana before answering. She has an interview at Building 9. The driver's eyes moved to her folder. Then she'll need a temporary badge. I was told to report to Building 4, Tiana said. That's not my department. There it was again. Not an insult exactly. Just another small gate closing under the weight of procedure. Vale asked who controlled the badge list. The driver said recruiting loaded the names each morning. When Vale asked whether Tiana Brooks appeared on his tablet, the man scrolled twice, then frowned. No Brooks. I've got 12 candidates, none with that name. Tiana felt the first real pinch of fear. The wrong building could have been careless administration. Missing from the transport list was something else. She opened her folder and pulled out the printed invitation, careful not to bend the corners. This came from Halcyon Recruiting. Interview confirmation, candidate number, everything. The driver read it without touching the page. Could be an old template. It was sent Tuesday. Vale held out his hand. May I? Tiana hesitated, then passed him the sheet. He read the header, the recruiter's name, and the candidate code near the bottom. His mouth tightened slightly when he reached the footer. This template was retired when the program moved. The boarding agent had followed them outside, still carrying Vale's phone charger and passport wallet. Mr. Vale, operations needs to know whether to release the aircraft. Release it. Your meeting in Zurich is with the lender group. I'm aware. Tiana looked at him. You don't have to miss that because my paperwork is a mess. Vale folded the letter once along the crease already there and handed it back. If your paperwork were simply a mess, I'd agree. Before she could ask what he meant, a woman wearing a Halcyon recruiting badge came through the terminal doors at a hurried walk. She was in her 30s, blonde hair clipped high, tablet held against her chest. Mr. Vale, I'm Melissa Grant. They said you were asking about the return program. I'm asking about one applicant. Melissa looked at Tiana and then at the letter in her hand. The expression shifted into something professionally neutral. Ms. Brooks, yes, we had a note on your file. Tiana waited. Lisa lowered her voice. There was concern about whether the role would be the right fit given the physical requirements and your recent employment history. My recent employment history is caring for my son. I understand, but there are attendance considerations. Reliability is part of the evaluation. Tiana's fingers pressed into the edge of the folder. I haven't missed anything. My interview is at 9. Melissa glanced at her tablet. Your interview was placed on administrative review yesterday. No one told me. We attempted contact. You called me at 6:42 last night and left a message asking me to confirm I understood the work involved. I called back at 6:49. Lisa's gaze flicked down. I don't have that callback logged. I spoke to someone named Eric for 4 minutes. Vale had not interrupted yet. That more than any speech made Tiana aware that he was listening to the sequence rather than waiting to rescue her. He asked Melissa one question. Why was she still sent an active interview letter? It may have gone automatically. And why does it contain a building assignment retired 5 weeks ago? Melissa shifted the tablet against her chest. There were migration issues when we moved candidates into the new system. That could explain the building, Vale said. It doesn't explain why her name disappeared from transport before anyone formally canceled her appointment. Gus's face changed by a degree. We didn't cancel it. We paused it. Tiana looked at her. Without telling me. We needed additional screening. For what? Melissa drew a breath. Workforce reentry candidates can require a more careful assessment. Tiana almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. Behind Melissa, another applicant stepped onto the shuttle without being asked for any additional screening. He was a white man, roughly Tiana's age, wearing a halcyon visitor sticker already printed with his name. Vale noticed him too. "Does his application paused?" he asked. Melissa turned. "I'd have to check. Check hers first." Vale nodded toward Tiana. "Not her resume, the file history. Every status changed since she was invited." Melissa looked uncomfortable. "That would normally require recruiting operations. Then bring recruiting operations into it." Tiana interrupted before the exchange could turn into a conversation about her that no longer included her. "I want something clear first. Do I still have an interview today?" Melissa glanced at Vale, then back at Tiana. "I can authorize a provisional slot." "No," Tiana said. "Was my original slot still valid when I arrived?" Melissa did not answer immediately. The shuttle driver shut off the engine. In the sudden quiet, Tiana could hear a baggage tug whining somewhere beyond the hangars. Vale looked at Melissa. "That silence is the first thing we verify." Melissa finally tapped her tablet. "I need 10 minutes." "You have 5, Tiana said, surprising herself. Vale did not correct her. He stepped aside so Melissa could make the call, while Tiana opened her folder again and took out the email showing the exact time her interview had been confirmed. For the first time that morning, the paper in her hand no longer felt like proof she needed to defend. It felt like the beginning of a record someone else would have to explain. Melissa returned in 6 minutes with a man from recruiting operations and an answer that made Tiana wish she had been wrong. Her original interview slot had not been canceled. At 7:11 that morning, someone had changed her status from confirmed to Rienji Ririu, which removed her name from the transportation list while leaving the appointment itself active. The operations manager, Javier Soto, kept his eyes on the tablet as he explained it. The system treats review status as non-travel eligible until screening is complete. "Who changed it?" Tiana asked. Javier glanced at Melissa. "The audit trail shows a recruiting user ID." "Whose?" Melissa stepped in. "We're getting into internal personnel information now. The important thing is that we've identified a workflow problem." Tiana looked at Vale, then back at her. "No. The important thing is that somebody changed my status less than 2 hours before an interview they never canceled. And that change made sure I couldn't get to the building where the interview was happening." Melissa's expression hardened in the small, controlled way Tiana had seen before from supervisors who wanted calm from the person they had inconvenienced more than they wanted accuracy from the process. "Ms. Brooks, I understand you're frustrated, but your tone is becoming confrontational." Javier lifted his head. So did the shuttle driver. Tiana felt heat rise along the back of her neck. She could have answered quickly, and part of her wanted to. Instead, she put the folder on the metal bench beside the curb and took out her phone. "I'm going to repeat what I asked. Who changed my status?" Melissa's lips pressed together. "I'm not discussing employee access logs on the curb." Vale spoke for the first time. "In several minutes. That's reasonable." Melissa seemed relieved until he continued. "So preserve the logs and review them inside." Javier nodded at once. "I can place a retention hold on the candidate activity record." Melissa turned toward him. "That isn't necessary yet. It is if there's a dispute about a same-day status change," Javier said. His voice had lost the deferential softness he had used when he arrived. "Otherwise, the normal sync overwrites some workstation details tonight." Tiana looked at him. "Overwrites what?" "Device session data. Not the status change itself, but which terminal made it and some routing metadata." That was the first thing anyone had said all morning that sounded fragile enough to disappear. "Please preserve it," Tiana said. Javier took out his company phone. Melissa lowered her tablet. "Hold on. Before we create an incident file, I think we should finish the screening issue. Miss Brooks, the concern wasn't only your employment gap." Tiana waited. Melissa scrolled. "The notes indicate questions about schedule flexibility, emergency availability, and whether you could reliably accept unscheduled overtime. The application says I'm available for first and second shift. This program feeds into maintenance teams where overtime happens. And the posting says overtime is voluntary during the training phase." Javier looked at Melissa again. Tiana saw it, a tiny pause that told her the language mattered. Melissa said, "Operational needs change. That isn't the same as changing the requirement after I apply." Vale stayed near the curb rail, letting Tiana make the argument herself. "Was that question asked of every candidate?" he said. Melissa's answer came too fast. It's part of screening, every candidate, Tiana repeated. Melissa looked down at the tablet. The shuttle driver shifted his weight. They didn't ask me that when I came through the program. Everyone turned toward him. He seemed immediately sorry he had spoken, but he continued. 2 years ago. Different recruiter, probably. I was a single dad then. He asked what shifts I could work. Nobody asked who had my kid if overtime ran late. Melissa's face tightened. The process has changed since then. Maybe, he said, but I've driven 3 applicants over this morning. Nobody asked them anything at the curb. Tiana felt something inside her settle. Well, not relief. Relief would come later if it came at all. This was simpler. A witness had finally named the difference without being prompted. Javier completed the retention request and showed Tiana the confirmation screen from a polite distance. Contribute audit data and session metadata are on hold for 30 days pending review. Thank you. Melissa exhaled through her nose. Fine. But until the re-entry review is cleared, I cannot authorize Ms. Brooks to participate in the technical assessment. There it was. The right she had traveled for, paid childcare for, and arranged her entire week around was no longer merely delayed by directions. It had been formally withheld. Tiana checked the time. 8:41. My interview is still on the calendar, she said. Yes, but you're refusing to let me take it. I'm pausing participation pending review, and I want that decision documented under your name. Melissa stared at her. You want to file a complaint? Tiana picked up her folder. Eek. The dinosaur keychain swung once against the plastic cover. She thought of her son asking that morning whether airplanes were harder to fix than bicycles, then insisting she take his keychain because dinosaurs don't get nervous. I want an appeal, she said, and I want the reason for this hold in writing before I leave this curb. Melissa's shoulders loosened almost imperceptibly, as if formal procedure were finally territory she trusted. That's your right. I know. Javier began opening the appeal form. Vale said nothing, but Tiana noticed him glance toward the terminal where his aircraft should have been preparing for Europe. Melissa seemed to think the morning had finally been contained. Tiana signed the appeal request at 8:47, and Javier attached the preserved activity record reference number before submitting it. The system accepted the filing and generated a case ID that could no longer be erased by moving her name to another list. At 9:03, was sitting in the passenger seat of Javier's company cart, instead of inside the technical lab where she was supposed to be testing. He had offered to drive her to Building 9 so she could at least speak with the assessment supervisor in person, and Melissa had objected until Vale asked whether an active appeal barred an applicant from entering the facility. It did not. The cart rattled across a service lane between hangars, carrying them past open maintenance bays where mechanics in hearing protection moved beneath aircraft bellies with inspection lights and rolling toolboxes. Tiana watched one technician guide a control surface panel into place and had to look away. She knew that work. She knew the smell of sealant, the metallic click of safety wire being twisted, the irritating habit of hydraulic fluid finding the one split in a glove. Sitting beside Javier while somebody else decided whether she was suitable for a shop floor felt worse than being openly rejected. Rejection at least admitted what it was. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A message from her sister read, "How'd it go?" Tiana stared at the screen. She had promised to call after the interview, not during another fight to reach it. Her sister had taken Malik to school and rearranged a nursing shift to cover pickup in case the assessment ran long. Tiana typed complicated, still here, then deleted it and wrote, "They haven't let me test yet." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "You want me to call?" Tiana smiled despite herself. Her sister's solution to nearly every crisis involved either food or a phone call delivered at unsafe volume. No, you need to handle it. The answer felt less certain after she sent it. Javier slowed near Building 9, a low gray structure with wide bay doors and a glass entrance facing the apron. "For what it's worth," he said, eyes on the lane, "I think the status change needs a real review." That sounded carefully worded. It was. "You think Melissa did it?" He hesitated. "I think the log will tell us who did it." Tiana turned toward him. "It wasn't what I asked." "No." Javier rubbed his thumb over the steering wheel. "It wasn't." She appreciated him more for refusing to pretend. Inside Building 9, the air was cooler and carried the sharp scent of aluminum dust and citrus cleaner. A receptionist checked Tiana's name against the assessment roster and frowned. "You're on here." Javier stopped beside her. receptionist rotated the monitor just enough for him to see. 9 o'clock. Brooks, Tiana, airframe systems, no cancellation mark. Tiana felt anger arrive in a cleaner form than it had at the terminal. So recruiting removed me from transportation, but didn't remove me from the technical schedule. Looks that way. A man in a navy shop coat came through the secure door carrying a clipboard. Tiana Brooks, she stood. I'm Warren, Kim assessment lead. He checked the wall clock. I was told you were delayed in transit, Javier said. There's an appeal in progress. Warren's attention shifted to him, then back to Tiana. Are you here to test? Yes. Then I need someone to tell me I'm not allowed to test you. Nobody has. For the first time that morning, Tiana almost laughed from relief. Then Melissa came through the entrance. She had taken another route and arrived carrying the same tablet. Warren, stop. Her participation is on hold pending additional suitability review. Warren's brows drew together. Suitability for what? The program. I assess technical readiness. This is broader than technical readiness. Tiana stepped between the two conversations before they could again become a debate conducted over her shoulder. What exactly are you reviewing now? Melissa looked at her screen. Availability, workforce continuity, and re-entry risk. Re-entry risk. It's a scoring category. Javier's head came up. Since when? Melissa did not answer him. Bill had entered quietly behind her. He had left his coat somewhere and rolled his shirt sleeves once at the wrist, looking less like a passenger now, and more like somebody who intended to stay. He said, show me the scoring category. Melissa's posture stiffened. I can request the current rubric. You just cited it. I know the criteria. Then where is it documented? Tiana watched Melissa's face. For the first time, the uncertainty was not about Tiana's qualifications. It belonged to the person defending the process. Warren looked at the clock again. My next candidate is at 10. If she starts now, I can still run the full practical, Melissa said. You cannot proceed. Warren put the clipboard down on the reception counter. Then document that instruction under your name. The phrase was almost identical to Tiana's request at the curb. Jessa heard it too. She opened her tablet, but before she could type, Javier's phone chimed. He looked at the screen and stopped moving. What? Vale asked. Javier turned the phone toward him. The preservation hold had returned the first session detail. Tiana's status had been changed from a terminal assigned not to recruiting operations, but to the executive hiring office. And the user credentials belonged to Melissa Grant. Melissa's face did not collapse. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, she became very still, as though the correct arrangement of her features might keep the problem administrative. Warren picked up his clipboard again but did not open the secure door. Javier lowered the phone and said, the session stamp matches your credentials at 7-11. That is the same change that pushed Ms. Brooks into re-entry review. Melissa looked at Vale. Can I explain? Tiana almost smiled at the phrase. All morning, explanations had arrived only after somebody else found the thing that needed explaining. She rested the folder against the reception counter and waited. The fluorescent lights above the entry hummed faintly, and through the glass wall, she could see a mechanic rolling a tool cabinet across the bay floor, each caster catching briefly in the expansion joints. Melissa drew in a breath. She had concerns about placing her directly into the assessment pool. Based on what? Asked. Her employment gap, dependence, limited recent field hours. Tiana said, my field hours ended when I left the airline. That's what a return program is for. Melissa looked at her. And the program has completion targets. Retention targets, too. If enter and wash out because the schedule becomes unmanageable, that affects the entire cohort. The reasoning was polished enough to sound responsible until Tiana heard what it actually required. So you decided I was more likely to fail because I'm a mother. I decided there were risk factors. Was parenthood one of them? Melissa did not answer. Javier opened the candidate workflow on his phone again. There's no dependent status field in the approved screening rubric. Melissa turned toward him. Recruiters make judgment calls, not by creating criteria that aren't in the rubric. That changed the shape of the room. Until then, Tiana had been fighting a decision somebody could defend as discretionary. Javier had just drawn a boundary around the discretion itself. Vale asked Warren, what do you receive before an applicant tests? Name, track, resume, accommodation notes if relevant. That's about it. No family information? No employment gap? Warren shrugged. I see the resume, so technically yes. But the practical doesn't score it. They either diagnose the fault and complete the repair sequence safely or they don't. Tiana looked toward the secure door. What's today's practical? Warren glanced at Melissa, then answered her. Control cable inspection, damage classification, and a simulated rigging correction. 45 minutes. Something in Tiana's chest loosened despite the anger. She had done that work before Malik learned to read. Her old supervisor used to complain that she could hear mistensioned cable before the gauge confirmed it, which was exaggerated but not entirely wrong. Vale folded his arms. If the approved assessment does not include these re-entry criteria, then the question is not whether Ms. Brooks deserves an exception. The question is why an unofficial screen was inserted before the official one. Melissa's eyes sharpened. You're making this sound intentional. I'm describing the sequence. Tiana heard the distinction and was grateful for it. Intent had become the refuge people reached for when the outcome was difficult to defend. She did not need Melissa to confess to prejudice. She needed the process to show what had happened. Javier scrolled farther through the activity record. There's another note. Melissa stepped toward him. Javier. He stopped, but not because of her tone. This was added yesterday afternoon. Free text comment. It says, Contridiant may face childcare-related schedule instability. Recommend defer to later cohort unless flexibility confirmed. Tiana stared at the screen. Who wrote that? Javier checked the user field. Lisa did. The words hit harder than the status change because they removed the last possibility that this had been a computer quirk. Tiana thought about the call the night before, the questions about overtime, the careful repetition of whether she understood the job was physical. She had answered every one of them as though the burden was hers to reassure. Melissa said, That note was based on information Ms. Brooks volunteered. I said I left work to care for my son, Tiana replied. I did not say I had unreliable childcare. It was a reasonable concern. No, it was an assumption. Vale looked at Javier. Preserve the note, the rubric version, and the access history. No edits, no deletions, no retroactive corrections until an independent review starts. Javier nodded. I can do that. Melissa's voice tightened. You cannot turn one recruiting judgment into an investigation because you dislike the wording. Vale looked at her, then at Tiana. I'm not investigating wording. He pointed toward Warren's clipboard. I'm preserving the difference between the test we approved and the test she was actually given. Warren opened the secure door. My 10 o'clock candidate isn't here yet. If her appeal keeps the original appointment active, I can start the practical now. Everyone looked at Tiana. And she had imagined this moment for weeks, but not with an executive beside her and a recruiter under review behind her. For 1 second, the attention made her want to refuse. She did not want anyone later saying she had passed because Vale watched. Then she remembered why she had come. Close the door after I go in, she told Warren. The observers. Vale nodded first. Tiana picked up the folder, removed the dinosaur keychain, and placed it on top of the reception counter. Keep that for me, she said to Javier. Then she entered the assessment bay alone. The assessment bay was louder than Tiana remembered maintenance shops being, though she knew memory had edited out the machinery and kept only the work. An air compressor cycled behind a partition. A rivet gun barked twice from another bay, and somewhere overhead a ventilation fan carried the dry metallic smell of aluminum dust across the room. Warren led her to a training stand holding a section of simulated flight control linkage, then stopped at the painted line on the floor. 45 minutes, he said. You can ask for a clarification if the instruction itself is unclear. Can't coach technique. That's fair. He handed her safety glasses and the work card. Tiana read it once, then again more slowly. Inspect the cable run. Identify discrepancies. Classify airworthiness impact. Perform the approved correction on the training assembly. Language was familiar enough that her hands wanted to start before her mind had finished checking the sequence. That impulse made her pause. 2 years away did not erase 7 years of experience, but pretending the gap meant nothing would be its own kind of pride. She set the card on the bench and traced the cable path visually before touching anything. At the first pulley, the strand alignment looked clean. And at the second, she saw abrasion near the guard. She crouched, angled the inspection light, and found the more important fault 3 inches farther back, a subtle flattening where the cable had been riding against a mispositioned fairlead. Warren wrote something on his sheet. Tiana ignored him. She checked tension, then stopped herself from reaching automatically for the adjustment point. Gauge reading was outside the nominal band, but only slightly. Years earlier, she might have corrected it first and returned to the cause later. Today, she followed the defect backward. The cable was not merely loose. The fair lead bracket had shifted just enough to create the wear pattern. Classification? Warren asked. Not serviceable as presented. The cable damage needs evaluation against limits, and the bracket position has to be corrected before rigging. Proceed. Her first mistake came 9 minutes later. Tiana selected the wrong size wrench from the shadow board, caught the error when it did not seat cleanly, and replaced it without forcing the fitting. The moment irritated her more than it should have. She could feel herself wanting to prove she had never been away, which was exactly the wrong reason to rush. She took her hands off the assembly. Problem? Warren asked. No, I'm trying not to turn being annoyed with myself into a second mistake. He made another mark but said nothing. Tiana reset the bracket, verified clearance, then inspected the damaged section against the training limits posted at the station. The abrasion was within replacement criteria, which meant the correct action was not to finish the rigging correction and declare success. She tagged the cable for removal in the simulation and documented the discrepancy before adjusting anything else. By the time she completed the final check, sweat had gathered beneath the edge of her safety glasses even though the room was cool. Warren looked at the clock. 87 minutes. Tiana removed her gloves. Is that good or bad? It's a time. That sounds like an assessment lead answer. It is. The dry reply pulled a short laugh from her, the first one that had not been sharpened by frustration all morning. Warren collected the work card and disappeared into a glass office to score it. Tiana stood alone beside the training stand, staring at the cable she had tagged. Her phone was still outside with the rest of her things, which meant she could not distract herself by checking messages from her sister. When Warren returned, his expression gave nothing away. You passed. Tiana exhaled. Strong diagnostics, he continued. You lost a point on tool selection and another because your first written note didn't specify the bracket displacement measurement. You corrected the documentation before final submission. How strong? 981. She smiled before she could stop herself. It'll take 91. You should. Warren clipped the score sheet to the work card. The cohort minimum is 78. The satisfaction lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Then he added, This still doesn't clear recruiting. Tiana looked at him. I know. That was the second problem now. She had proved she could do the work, but the process that had tried to keep her from proving it was still intact. Outside the bay, Javier was waiting with the dinosaur keychain looped around one finger. Vale stood farther down the corridor speaking with a woman Tiana had not seen before, while Melissa was gone. Javier handed over the keychain. The preservation pull expanded. Tiana's good mood tightened. Expanded how? We checked whether the re-entry risk note was unique to your file. And? He glanced toward Vale before answering. It wasn't. Tiana slipped the keychain back onto her folder. How many? Enough that we stopped counting manually and asked compliance to run the cohort. Vale ended his conversation and walked over. Your test? 981. A genuine smile crossed his face. Good. Don't sound surprised. I don't. Javier turned his phone so Tiana could see the preliminary report. The same free text language had appeared in several candidate files over the previous 4 months. Childcare flexibility, caregiving interruption, schedule instability, re-entry concern. Not all had been moved to review. But every candidate who had been deferred under that language was a woman. Tiana read the list twice. Her own case had just stopped being only about getting through one locked door. Vale did not call a meeting immediately. That mattered to Tiana. Instead, compliance locked the affected candidate records. Warren returned to his assessment schedule, and Javier spent the next hour pulling the approved screening rubric beside the actual recruiter notes. By noon, the pattern had acquired edges. 17 women had received caregiving-related comments. 9 had been moved into additional review. 6 had been deferred to later cohorts. None of the comparable male applicants with employment gaps had been routed that way. Tiana sat in a small conference room off the maintenance floor with a paper cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink. Through the interior window, apprentices practiced lockwire patterns at a long bench. The ordinary rhythm of the shop made the numbers harder to dismiss. These were not abstract candidates. They were people who might have been standing out there if a recruiter had not decided uncertainty at home mattered more than the skills assessment. Javier slid a printed comparison sheet across the table. This is preliminary. Compliance verified the candidate's statuses against the approved criteria, but they haven't interviewed the recruiters yet. Tiana read the column headings: field employment gap, shift availability, technical qualification, additional review, free text rationale. Files stopped her. Conchidian took 18 months off for elder care, she said. Available all listed shifts. Prior turbine experience. Deferred for continuity concern. Javier nodded. Did she ever get tested? No. Tiana looked up. Then you don't know whether she was qualified. No. Vale stood near the window rather than at the head of the table. The woman he had been speaking with earlier introduced herself as Denise Harper, Halcyon's Director of Workforce Compliance. She was black, perhaps 10 years older than Tiana, with close-cropped gray at her temples, and the expression of someone who disliked conclusions reached before the documents earned them. We need to separate 3 questions, Denise said. Was the approved process bypassed? Was the bypass applied unevenly? And did that uneven application produce actual adverse decisions? Tiana tapped the deferred file. Isn't this an adverse decision? It appears to be. I'm telling you what we still have to prove, not what I think is comfortable. Tiana appreciated that more than reassurance. Alyssa entered with an HR representative at 12:18. She had been instructed not to access candidate files while the review was active, but she had not been suspended from employment. Vale made that distinction clear before anyone spoke. Tiana noticed he did not pretend authority meant instant punishment. Denise began with the rubric. There is caregiver status listed as a screening criteria. It isn't written that way, Melissa said. Where is reentry risk defined? It was a recruiting judgment category. Approved by whom? Melissa glanced toward Vale. Reader. The program was under pressure to improve completion rates. We were told to identify candidates likely to struggle with schedule demands. Vale's expression did not change. Who told you that? Leadership emphasized retention. That is not the same instruction. Melissa looked down at the table. No. Denise moved to the candidate notes. Why does childcare-related schedule instability appear when Ms. Brooks reported confirmed shift availability? Melissa's voice sharpened, because availability on an application doesn't always reflect reality. Tiana leaned forward before Denise could continue. Did you ask me what my childcare actually was? Melissa looked at her. No. Did you ask whether I could cover the shifts listed? Yes. And what did I say? That you could. Tiana nodded. Then what fact contradicted me? Melissa hesitated. Your previous resignation was connected to caregiving. My son was receiving treatment. That ended. You turned something true about my past into something you assumed about my present. The HR representative shifted in her chair. Denise did not interrupt. Melissa finally said, I was trying to protect the program from avoidable attrition. Tiana felt the answer settle more heavily than an apology would have. By avoiding candidates you thought might become inconvenient. That isn't how I would phrase it, no. It's how the files phrase it. Denise placed another document on the table. It was an audit sample from 3 male applicants with comparable gaps. One had left work to care for his father, another after a workplace injury, another after becoming a full-time parent during a divorce. All 3 had gone directly to technical assessment. Melissa stared at the pages. Vale asked one question. What would you have done with Ms. Brooks if she hadn't met me? No one moved. Melissa's answer came quietly. She probably would have been deferred. Tiana looked at the untouched coffee beside her. That was the collision she had needed. Not a confession of hatred, not a dramatic collapse. Even a plain admission that the unofficial screen would have worked exactly as designed if nobody had forced anyone to compare it with the real one. Denise closed the folder. Effective immediately, caregiver-based free text screening is suspended. All deferrals tied to those notes are frozen pending independent review. The affected candidates will be contacted before any cohort slots are reassigned. Vale nodded once. And Melissa? Removed from candidate decision-making while HR investigates her use of unapproved criteria. Final employment action follows verified findings. Tiana exhaled, but she did not feel finished. I want one more thing, she said. Denise looked at her. Don't just reopen our files. Give every affected applicant the assessment they should have received in the first place. Denise considered that, then wrote it down. Outside the window, an apprentice held up a completed lockwire pattern for inspection. For the first time that day, Tiana watched someone check the work before deciding whether the person belonged there. By late afternoon, Halcyon had moved from discovery to action, but Tiana noticed how carefully everyone named those actions. Melissa was removed from candidate decisions, not fired. The screening rule was suspended, not erased. Compliance had opened an independent review, not declared guilt. Denise repeated the distinctions because they mattered, and Tiana respected that. What mattered more was that 6 deferred applicants had already been contacted and offered technical assessments before any new seats were filled. Tiana's own result presented a different problem. Warren had certified her score, but the cohort she had applied for was nearly full. Denise explained that the final placement decision belonged to the training operations team after a standardized review of scores, shift availability, and seat capacity. Your 91 puts you above the current median, she said. But I'm not going to turn what happened this morning into a special admission. I don't want one. I figured. Vale sat across from them, silent until Denise finished. Good. Then the correction is that her application returns to the point where the unauthorized screen interfered with it. Nothing more. Tiana appreciated the sentence because it put the remedy where she wanted it. She had not spent the day proving she deserved charity from a billionaire. She had spent it proving the process had been bent before she ever reached the test. Still, the victory carried a cost she had not anticipated. Her phone showed 3 missed messages from her sister, and one from Malik's school reminding her about his reading night at 6. She had promised she would be there. She stepped into the hallway and called her sister. "You alive?" Renee answered. "Technically. That means trouble." Tiana leaned against the cool cinder block wall. She told her the short version, leaving out Vale's name until the end. Renee was quiet for 2 seconds. "You asked a billionaire for directions? I asked a man with a suitcase. And he canceled an international flight? That part is not helping me feel normal." Renee laughed hard enough that Tiana had to pull the phone away. Then her sister's voice softened. "Malik keeps asking if you got the airplane job. I don't know yet. You coming to reading night?" Tiana looked through the window into the training bay. Warren was resetting the cable rig for tomorrow's assessments. Denise had another stack of candidate files open. Vale was speaking with someone from training operations, but he did not look toward Tiana as if expecting her to stay. "I'm leaving in 20 minutes, she said. "You sure?" "Yes." That choice became harder 10 minutes later when Denise returned with the placement result. Tiana had been accepted into the next airframe systems cohort starting in 3 weeks. The schedule matched the availability she had listed from the beginning. No special conditions, no additional re-entry screening. The same written terms used for every other accepted candidate. Tiana read the offer twice. "Congratulations," Denise said. "Thank you. There is one complication." Of course there was. The independent review had found enough preliminary evidence to require a broader audit of the return program, including past applicants who had never reached assessment. Halcyon's board committee wanted Denise to preserve all related recruiting records and commission an outside employment practices review. The process would take weeks, maybe longer. "What happens to Melissa?" Tiana asked. "Her access stays restricted. HR will interview her, her supervisor, and everyone who approved or knew about the unofficial screening practice. If the findings support policy violations, disciplinary action could range from formal sanction to termination. And the people who were deferred, we contact them, offer restored assessment opportunities, and cover reasonable travel costs where the company's actions caused a wasted trip." Tiana nodded slowly. "It matters." It does. The decision did not repair everything. One candidate had already accepted work in another state. Another had stopped responding to Halcyon months earlier. A fair process restored late could not return every opportunity exactly as it had been. At 5:14, Tiana walked back through the private terminal with her offer letter inside the same plastic folder. The shuttle attendant who had sent her toward the service road was still at the desk. When he saw her, his expression changed. "I heard there was some confusion this morning," he said. Tiana stopped. There wasn't confusion. He looked uncomfortable. "You gave me different directions before checking where I was actually going," he swallowed. "You're right. It was not an elegant apology, but it was specific. Outside, Vale was waiting for a car instead of another aircraft. Zurich will survive one postponed meeting," he said when she approached. "Malik's reading night might not survive me missing it." "Then don't." She smiled. I wasn't planning to. Tiana reached into her folder, touched the dinosaur keychain, and headed toward the parking shuttle. Behind her, workers were replacing the old Building 4 routing signs with temporary notices directing applicants to Building 9. For once, the directions were being corrected before the next person had to ask. 3 weeks later, Anna arrived at Building 9 before sunrise wearing the same work boots she had polished for her interview. This time, her name was already printed on the temporary badge waiting at reception. No one asked whether she understood the job was physical. No one asked who would pick up Malik if a shift ran late. Warren checked her badge, pointed her toward the locker room, and told her the first training block started at 7. The return cohort had 12 people. 4 had been among the applicants pulled back from deferred status after the audit began. A was Lena Ortiz, the former turbine mechanic whose file Tiana had read during the preliminary review. She recognized Tiana before introductions were finished. "You're the one who started all this." Tiana shook her head. "I asked for directions." Lena laughed. "That's worse." That means the rest of us were one map away from finding out. The joke stayed with Tiana through the morning. Training was not easy. Her hands remembered safety wire tension faster than her shoulders remembered 8 hours on concrete, and by lunch she had a blister forming below her right thumb. She ate a sandwich beside Lena while 2 younger trainees argued about torque conversions. For several minutes, nobody talked about audits, discrimination, or Halcyon's return program. Tiana had almost forgotten how good ordinary work complaints could sound. The independent findings were released that afternoon. Denise called during the cohort's final break and asked whether Tiana wanted the summary before it became public internally. Tiana stepped outside near the equipment cage, where warm air from the hangar carried the smell of rubber and solvent. The review had examined 2 years of return program recruiting. 31 applicants had received undocumented continuity risk judgments. 23 were women. 17 of those women had disclosed caregiving responsibilities or family-related employment gaps. Melissa's notes were only part of it. Her supervisor had known recruiters were using informal judgments to improve retention numbers, though investigators found no written instructions specifically targeting parents or women. He had seen the pattern in monthly reports and never asked why women with qualifying experience were reaching technical assessment at a lower rate. "What happens now?" Tiana asked. Melissa was terminated for repeated use of unauthorized criteria and inaccurate documentation of candidate decisions, Denise said. Her supervisor was removed from recruiting leadership and placed under final disciplinary review. The company is also refunding travel expenses for applicants who were brought to a site and then denied an assessment without an approved reason. Tiana looked through the hangar doors at Lena, who was practicing inspection measurements with another trainee. And the process. Free text suitability screening is gone. Any deferral before technical assessment now requires a defined criterion, a second reviewer, and a reason visible to the candidate. We're also tracking pass-through rates by stage instead of rewarding recruiters mainly for cohort completion. That last change mattered more to Tiana than she expected. The old metric had made exclusion look like efficiency. Fixing the people without fixing the incentive would have left the same machinery waiting for different hands. Will the numbers be reviewed again? Quarterly for the first year. Outside compliance gets the reports. Good. Denise was quiet a moment. There's something else. The shuttle attendant gave a statement. Tiana leaned against the equipment cage. He admitted he had been informally directing people he assumed were vendors or contract labor toward the service route, instead of checking their destination first. Facilities retrained the terminal staff and changed the information desk procedure. Destination first, credential second. No appearance-based routing. Tiana remembered the ski cases, the map spread across the desk, the certainty with which he had sent her around the garage. He's still working there? Yes. There were no prior documented complaints, and he acknowledged what he did before the review concluded. Tiana considered that. Then I hope he remembers. He says he does. The following Monday, the old printed signs disappeared entirely. Building assignments were now generated from the same scheduling database that controlled assessment rosters. A candidate could not be sent to one facility while being expected at another. Javier showed Tiana the change when he came through the training floor. Turns out directions can be a systems problem. Careful, she said. You're starting to sound philosophical. I'll report myself. At home that night, Malik sat at the kitchen table building a cardboard airplane, while Tiana soaked her sore hand in cold water. He had taped the wings on backward and refused every suggestion that this might affect performance. It's faster this way, he explained. According to what engineer? Me. Tiana decided not to argue with management. Her offer letter was pinned to the refrigerator, but the dinosaur keychain had returned to Malik's backpack. She no longer needed it as armor. The job had not erased the months she spent worrying that stepping away for her son had permanently narrowed her future, and the investigation could not restore every candidate's lost time. But tomorrow morning, would be beside her at the training bench. 6 other deferred applicants had assessments scheduled that month, and Halcyon now had to measure who reached the door, not merely congratulate itself for whoever survived the hallway. Before bed, Tiana checked her schedule. The next training block was listed correctly. So was the building. 6 months later, Tiana no longer checked the building number twice before leaving home. She still checked everything else. Malik's lunch, her badge, the weather over the maintenance field, whether the bus from employee parking was running on its winter schedule. Habit had survived longer than fear, and some morning she caught herself touching the folder pocket of her backpack where the interview letter used to ride. She had stopped carrying the paper after her 3rd month in the airframe systems program, when Warren told her she was spending more time protecting old proof than trusting the work in front of her. By then, the work had become demanding in ordinary ways. Tiana finished 2nd in her cohort, lost 1st place because of a written inspection error she was still annoyed about, and accepted a position on Halcyon's flight control maintenance team. Tiana joined a turbine group 2 hangars over. 3 other candidates recovered through the audit had completed training, while 2 decided Halcyon no longer fit their lives and took jobs elsewhere. Denise had insisted those choices be included in the final report. Restoration, she said, did not mean pretending everyone wanted to return. The outside compliance review closed in January. Halcyon published the findings internally and released a summary to affected applicants. 31 candidate files had been improperly subjected to criteria outside the approved process. 20 applicants received new assessments or reimbursement. 9 entered later training cohorts. Recruiting leadership adopted a 2nd review requirement for pre-assessment deferrals, and quarterly audits showed the gap between men and women advancing to technical testing had narrowed to less than 2 percentage points. Bill did not appear in the announcement. Tiana noticed that too. He had canceled one flight because something in her appointment letter did not make sense, but he had not turned himself into the hero of what followed. When they crossed paths once near the executive hangar, he asked whether she still liked flight controls. She told him she liked them more than paperwork. He said that sounded healthy and kept walking toward his meeting. The shuttle attendant remained at the terminal information desk. Tiana saw him occasionally when maintenance assignments brought her across the field. He now asked every traveler the same first question: "Where are you headed?" No guesses. No side road before the destination. The first time he asked Tiana, they both recognized the history in it. Neither explained it. On a cold Friday, near the end of her probationary period, Warren handed her a work order involving an aircraft scheduled for departure that afternoon. A pilot had reported slight resistance during a control check, intermittent enough that an earlier inspection had found nothing obvious. Tiana worked the cable run with another mechanic, listening to pulleys turn beneath the access panels. Near the aft section, she found a worn guide beginning to shift under load. The defect was small. The consequence of ignoring it would not have been. She documented the measurement, tagged the component, and watched operations delay the aircraft while the part was replaced. Nobody complained that the schedule mattered more than the inspection. The departure moved 90 minutes. Later, Warren signed her probation completion form at the same training bench where she had taken her original assessment. 981, he said. Tiana looked up. 8. Your interview score. You were unhappy with 91. I was not unhappy. You asked how strong it was. That is not the same thing. He smiled and handed her the form. You still picked the wrong wrench, one time. History is cruel. She folded the paper and slid it into her locker. That evening, she and Malik stopped at a diner near his school. He was explaining why his newest cardboard aircraft required 3 engines when Tiana's phone vibrated beside the ketchup bottle. The message came from Denise. The quarterly audit was attached, but that was not why she had written. A community technical college on the other side of the city had asked Halcyon to help design a return-to-trades program for adults who had left skilled work because of caregiving. Denise wanted someone from maintenance who had actually gone through re-entry to review the proposal before the company committed. No speech. No ceremony. Just a document and a question. Interested? Tiana looked across the booth at Malik, who was using 2 French fries to demonstrate die thrust. "I need one of those," she said. "One of what?" "A wing." He handed her the straighter fry. Tiana opened the proposal, read the first paragraph, then saved it for later. Tomorrow was Saturday. Malik had a science fair, laundry had become an emergency, and she had learned enough about second chances to know they did not all require immediate answers. She placed the phone face down beside her plate. Outside the diner window, an aircraft crossed the evening sky toward a destination she did not need to know yet.